The good. The bad. The ugly.
That's the theme for this week's State Capitol Report as Victoria gives us her inside take on the good laws, the not so good, and the just downright ugly that came out of the 2023 General Assembly. Plus, do we need to worry about FBI agents infiltrating local Catholic churches? Welcome to Speak Up Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candy Cushman, with our president, Victoria Cobb. All right, we're finally going to give you what we've been promising for a while now, and that is the final report, the inside scoop on the outcomes of the 2023 General Assembly and how this impacts you, Virginia families, moving forward. Victoria, let's start with the good here.
Okay, so we did have one really great thing, which is we actually have a bill on the governor's desk, which I was not honestly expecting given the division between the House and the Senate and so forth. So we have a bill, and this is a bill that we pushed last year and couldn't get through. But the concept is that we will not have a situation again like we had during the pandemic where the governor decided that certain businesses, and if you remember, it was alcohol stores and things that we didn't think, he deemed those essential, and then churches were actually shut down. They were deemed non-essential.
Yes.
And so this bill claims and makes it clear that you can't keep some things open and not keep churches open.
Yes, that was Governor Northam.
Yes.
That did that. Now we have this Governor Youngkin. This bill sitting on his desk,
Yes.
and he's expected to sign it.
Yes,
so
we don't think there'll be any issue with that. Now, I jokingly call it, this is just a restatement of the First Amendment because we have a right to worship, and I would argue that should have never happened in the first place.
But it is a victory for First Amendment issues and also for just restraining out-of-control government.
Absolutely. We've tried a lot of things on this pandemic. We saw government way out of, we're still working on, how long can an emergency be? That it's amazing to me that we have not yet been able to restrict the power of the governor in a pandemic because we saw how just across the board that was. But at least in this area, at least with churches, we've gotten something done.
At least we got parental rights for whether kids have to wear a mask or not.
Yeah, that's true. We did also get that.
Yeah, we're building
so
on
two
this.
Pieces.
Churches to be at least treated equally.
Right.
So that's good. Well, we had some other victories in the area of restraint, especially when it comes to defeating what would have been a constitutional amendment to basically codify unlimited abortion, and also on the marriage issue. Tell us about those.
Yeah, there were two efforts with constitutional amendments. So these are things that would permanently change the Virginia Constitution, and therefore all laws would be impacted by it. And so one was unlimited right to abortion. So any restrictions on abortion would have been in trouble if we had seen this bill pass. And so we're very grateful that we're not going to, ultimately that would go to the people, and we'd have a big effort at the ballot on whether we're going to change the Constitution, but it has to pass the legislature first. So we're just glad we stalled that and hopefully killed it for quite some time. And then the other one was trying to repeal an effort we actually, the Family Foundation, led in 2006, which was that we have a traditional definition of marriage in our Constitution, and they wanted to pull that out.
Yeah, and those are both very significant. On the abortion one, if that would have gotten through, it would have ended up really nullifying any kind of pro-life law that before it even had a chance to go through the General Assembly, including parental rights for abortion. So that was very significant. And then just on the marriage, it's good to have that language in there in case there is progress in the future.
Yeah.
Toward, in the Supreme Court area, toward once again protecting traditional marriage. So.
Absolutely. Sometimes the things that don't get done are the victories, and people tend to forget that stopping bad ideas is really important. And we saw during 2 years of liberal reign in Virginia that when there is nothing to stop crazy ideas, we pay the price.
Yeah, stopping things is a victory.
It is a victory. People cannot underestimate how important that is.
Well, all right, we can go ahead and move into the bad category then. That was the good, and then we have the bad. But let's just talk about the big picture here because I've seen people concluding that this whole thing was a draw in the sense that basically everything good that came out of the House was then blocked in the Senate and vice versa. What's your take on that?
That's a fair assessment. The House is predominantly conservative, the Senate is predominantly liberal, and so bad ideas come from the Senate, and then thankfully they get stopped in the House. Good ideas. So you got the idea. That is generally what happened, and unfortunately that means a lot of good ideas did not end up passing. So that is disappointing. They all run into the same roadblock. But there's a lot in the background, and I feel like people need to understand the context of session, because it's not just sort of who controls each chamber. It's also things that people don't think about, like the fact that we actually have redistricting that has happened. And so this is an election year in Virginia. All senators and House delegates will run for re-election. And because they've redrawn the lines, that happens every 10 years. They go to court and fight about it for a couple of years. And then this is the first election where it's really in play for everybody. What that means is that you can have, for example, 2 incumbent Republicans or 2 incumbent Democrats be put into the same new district. Well, what does that mean? That means they're both kind of showing off during the General Assembly, because they have to outdo the other one to capture their base nomination. They want to be the one Republican that ends up being nominated for that district. So there's a lot of things that are in the background that affect kind of what bills move forward and what people say about them and all of that.
Give us just one example where you feel like that played into an issue.
Well, I mean, you definitely see, I guess there's a really contentious primary in the southwest area of Virginia between 2 delegates. And I think there is a bit of who can be more conservative in what they introduced. So we're glad, because that gets really conservative ideas introduced. So one of them introduced a total ban on abortion, just the idea that, like, we're going to value life from the start. The other one carried the Essential Churches bill. They're both trying to posture themselves well for the fact that they want to be the Republican nominee from the area.
And then sometimes it worked in the negative, where you had what should be a Republican, because they're in a more radical district, or maybe competing with someone more liberal this time, going negative.
We
saw some of that too.
That's correct.
Well, let me just stop for a moment and remind you that an easy way to help people get involved and really understand the issues that are going on in the state, what's happening in the state capitol, how their vote makes a difference, is to just tune them into this podcast. So share this with your friends. And also it helps whatever platform that you're listening to this on, whether it's Google, Spotify, Apple. If you give us a review, that always helps lift up our program so other people can find it. So don't forget to share with others and give us that 5-star review if you like what you're hearing. Well, last time we covered what happened with the pro-life bills, but let's catch people up with the outcome for the parental rights legislation. I know a lot of our listeners care deeply about this issue. In fact, a lot of you came out for Mama Bear Day at the state capitol, so they wanted to be heard on this. So tell us where it all landed.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of bills that fit into that parental rights category. And if I had thought what one bill would pass, if there was going to be a bill to pass, I would have thought it was a parental rights one, because the election message of the previous election had been so strong in that direction. But I would have been wrong, because none of them ended up passing. But let me give you a reminder of what were the kinds of bills that were introduced. We had efforts to basically get parents in the loop on what are the library books in your child's school. Can we at least have some guidelines? Can parents know about them? We had a lot of bills kind of in that direction. We had bills that said parents better have access to their child's medical records. That's a stunner that doesn't pass, that we actually allow kids to have medical things happen that parents aren't in the loop on, and that didn't even pass. We had littler bills. I think they're a less big deal, I would say, which was just simply, hey, if there's going to be an outside speaker in your public school, parents ought to know about that.
But that can be a big deal if it's one of these drag queen things or Planned Parenthood.
It can be, but you would think that should be, if we're going to do something outside the existing curriculum that's not even on paper, you'd think that would be an easy one to say, yeah, parents should know about that. I guess that was my point. Not that it can't be a terrible thing that happens, but just that should be one that they go, yeah, parents have a right to know who comes in and out of my kid's classroom.
Common sense.
Yeah, common sense. And we had one that was a big deal especially for Northern Virginians who was, that have dealt with this issue on merit. Are the schools going to tell our kids that they've actually received National Merit Society, recommendations that they get the highest level, great scores on things? That's been hidden from parents. And so I thought at least that bill would pass. Mm-hmm. But no, all of these bills fell prey to the same committee, the Senate Education and Health Committee.
Which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Yes. Well, basically, people are concerned that we've been seeing this trend grow. As one of the parents testified at our Mama Bear press conference, they've been actually watching in their schools parents getting more and more cut out of the process. And all these bills were an effort to put it back in the right direction, restore parents back to the driver's seat. And so it is disturbing that none of them made it through. And I did want to just touch on the one that got national attention, and that's Sage's Law. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, this was just, again, a bill that was designed after an incredibly tragic story around a young girl named Sage, and just all that she went through that was ultimately, it started as a result of her being confused about her gender in the school system, and the school system not notifying the parents, and she ultimately gets drawn into,
even hiding from the parents.
Yes, hiding it from the parents, and she gets drawn into sex trafficking, and it's just a terrible story. But that bill simply said, at the point at which the school is participating in a child claiming to be a different gender than their biology, that's when the parent needs to know, and that should have been a no-brainer. That is your child presenting as something totally different, using a different restroom. The parent should know. And that, unfortunately, although it did get great attention, and it will be back, there's no question that this bill will be brought forward, and we're still seeing it play out in news stories. And we're seeing other states look at it. And so there's so much good that happened as a result of bringing forward this story and this bill, but it did not change the situation in our schools yet.
Now, one of the common arguments that we kept hearing again and again against Sage's Law was this claim that it's basically creating forced outings of students. Let's just listen to that claim being made by Delegate Rome, who is known as the first openly transgender person elected to the U.S. legislature, or at least one of the first. So let's just hear that clip real quick.
And now you're dealing with forcibly outing trans kids, and you didn't even talk to the one person in this body who actually knows what it's like to be scared to death as a 13, 14-year-old kid of anyone finding out that you're actually trans. You have no idea what you're doing.
Wow, you can just really hear the anger and just the raw emotion in that comment. But this is actually a talking point that was made repeatedly, right?
Yeah, this was their big selling point for their side, was this is forcing a child to come out. And so we even tried to clarify the bill. Okay, no, we're really talking about the point at which they're telling the school to be a part of their transition, their effort to present as something else. This is not a casual conversation about I might be feeling something or thinking something. So we tried to even go halfway with them to say, okay, maybe we weren't as clear as we could possibly be, but the emotion behind it, it's shocking because in one hand, they want these kids to be treated as adults. They're in their minds, they're old enough to determine and even change their gender. And they would say go all the way to changing their body to align with new thoughts about themselves.
Even a 14-year-old.
At 14-year-old, this is their argument.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, they're apparently not mature enough to have the conversation with their parents. Like adults, even in conflict, even if we have different views about something, we can have a conversation, and they're trying to prevent them from that.
Well, I also think the term forced outing is a little bit ironic when in most of these cases, the kids are pretty much out to everyone at school, their friends, the school
1,000 of their closest friends.
The only one that doesn't know is the parent.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know that that's really a accurate description for what this bill does. It just brings the parents into the loop that everyone else is already in that loop.
Correct. Some of these arguments, and when you're at the General Assembly long enough, they're really false herrings. They're really not the actual problem. They just need something that will stick, that will go in the media, that's compelling, that's emotional, even if it's not accurate to the actual words of the legislation. Yeah, and I hate to say it, that's what was happening here.
Yeah. Well, again, like you said, the good news is this issue is not going away. It got national attention. Other parents in other states are speaking up simultaneously. I think this is going to continue moving forward. And tell us about how we saw a little bit of that silver lining with some comments made even by legislators that were voting against it.
Yeah, this was I think a fairly unusual thing. I don't see this often where you have liberal legislators who oppose everything in this bill, but yet they were overwhelmingly apologetic about voting against it. They were emotional. Look, I'm so sorry about this story. They felt the need to sympathize with the situation, which usually they have no sympathy for our side of an issue. And so I think that from the perspective, people have to remember a bill is trying to pass the legislature, but it's also a matter of the court of public opinion. What do people think about these ideas? We're trying to move hearts and minds. And I think the hearts and minds were moved with this bill. And even the ones... They knew it. Even the ones of liberal legislators had to, at least sort of acknowledge or be on the side of where the public is around this issue.
And you're being charitable, but I would say they felt they had to cover themselves.
Yeah, that's another way to look at it.
That means we are making track. The parents are having traction.
Correct. Absolutely.
Well, we mentioned that we were going to cover some parts of the session that were just downright ugly. And in addition to these outrageous efforts to skew the true intent of Sage's Law, I personally thought we had some pretty ugly moments when there was actual name-calling happening during some of these debates.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of the ugliest bill as it played out in the sense of the hearing around a bill was actually the fairness in women's sports, which is just amazing that can provoke such anger or such name-calling. But when we presented that bill, there were a couple delegates. Their reactions from the committee, their comments were just outrageous. You want to go ahead and listen to maybe something out of that?
Yeah, I think this is from Delegate Bourne, right?
Yeah.
Let's listen to his comment for a minute.
And I would, again, urge everyone to oppose this measure. I grow really tired, as a lot of us do, coming here and have to fight over and over again because a certain small percentage portion of very small-minded people need a group or a person to hate. And that's all this bill is. So, Mr. Chair, members of this committee, I would strongly urge you, plead with you, please protect our kids, all of our kids, and vote no on this bill.
I'm going to remind members of the committee, argue passionately for or against your bills. But the next person that gets up here and says that if somebody disagrees with them, this particular policy position, that automatically makes them small-minded, mean, or looking for someone to hate, I am going to cut you off. We will have a civil dialogue.
All right, so not much nuance there. If you oppose biological boys playing on girls' sports teams, you're a bigot, was the essence of that comment.
Yeah.
But you got to admire Delegate Freitas for drawing a line there.
Absolutely. It is great to have committee chairmen that go, wait a second, there's decorum. We don't name call. We defeat concepts. We disagree over policy. We don't insult the people that are on the other side of something.
Well, so tell us about kind of what happened with that bill, the fairness in female sports.
Yeah, it was really disappointing. We were able to, again, move this bill along, but then we run into, it's always the Senate. This is always the challenge that we have with women's sports and every other bill, is that there's really this idea that we should let everyone do what they want to do, and somehow that's not going to impact people. And so we had tremendous testimony, and it's just disappointing to think that we can't simply say that biological males should not be winning championships over girls in girls' sports on a women's team. So yeah, not the ending we had hoped.
Yeah. Well, I think to kind of sum up here, I think one of the ugliest parts of this whole session was the freedom that left-wing legislators felt to completely ignore parents. They apparently felt zero accountability to them.
It's literally like they're begging for the public to remind them of the election lesson we tried to express in the governor's election when Governor Youngkin was. It's like we're up now. Please remind us of what you said last time, because they couldn't have been more clear that they are just absolutely on the opposite side of parents. And specifically, we're speaking about the Senate.
They didn't even feel a need to compromise, even on the little things.
No, I think that's what was so stunning is you had so many different parents' bills, different options. Pick one that you actually think, okay, in this one instance, a parent should know about their child's activities. But they didn't do that. They universally defeated every opportunity for a parent to actually know what's going on in the life of their child.
Yeah, so I think, and I don't state things like this, but I want to go so far to say, because this was all done on party line votes, that the Democrats made it pretty clear that they are the party against parents.
Yeah, it was very, very partisan on almost all these bills. Almost all of them were a straight party line vote. And maybe it's worth talking about who these folks are, because there are elections coming up, and we're not sitting here telling people how to vote, but you need to keep in mind how these legislators voted when you then decide whether to send them back. And so if it's okay, I'd like to say who they were.
Yeah,
is that an option?
Yeah, let me just remind people that you had mentioned this one committee.
Yes.
That all these bills we're talking about, the pro-life bills, the parental rights bills, Sage's Law, fairness in female sports, they all died in the same committee.
Yeah. And
that is you can correct me if I get the name wrong, I think it's the Senate Education and Health Committee.
Yep. So this one committee defeats it all, and it's really 9 people because that's the partisan lineup. It's pretty much 9 people on all these bills. You've got your chairwoman, Louise Lucas. You've got Senator Saslaw, Senator Howell. You have Mamie Locke, Senator Locke. And then you've got Senator George Barker. You've got Senator Chap Peterson. You've got Senator John Edwards from the Roanoke area. I mean, these are actually from all over the state. There's a lot of Northern Virginia, but these are actually representative all over. And then there's Senator Hashmi, who's actually from the Metro Richmond area. So
yeah, I'm looking. You've
not
got
good.
A lot of Northern Virginia, and again, we're talking about this is the Senate Education and Health Committee, and that's what stopped everything. So the Democrats on that, they're the ones that voted these all down. So I'm looking at, you got a lot of Nova people, Richmond, and but you said there's some other from Roanoke and Hampton.
Yeah, I mean, you actually kind of have a senator from every sort of metro area of Virginia, which is disturbing that it's not just, years ago we used to like to blame all the liberal problems on Northern Virginia, which isn't really fair. But now we really see, unfortunately, this is, I would say, every area of the state has an opportunity to look at the opposition of parents and vote differently.
So check out who is on the Senate Education and Health Committee, and they need to hear from you. And we just listed a lot of them. Now, there was one Republican that also...
we need to be fair. There was one senator on the Republican side who voted against a couple of these bills, which was stunning. Senator Donovan, she's from sort of Metro Richmond area. Henrico pretty much is her district. And I was disappointed she voted against parents knowing their child's medical records. And as a doctor, that's kind of devastating to think that you've got medical professionals that don't want the parent in the loop. I don't know what's kind of behind that, but that one was, I'd say, really disappointing. So yes, it wasn't perfectly down partisan line, and we do need to lay that out clearly for folks. And we do need to remember, I guess on a good news front, 4 of the folks that voted this way are retiring. So that's, that's at least helpful.
Yeah, Saslaw.
Oh, sorry, 3 of the folks. Saslaw, Howell, and Edwards have all announced their retirements. So that's at least.
What is that going to mean for next year's Senate Education and Health
It's a
Committee?
great question because 2 of those are tough Northern Virginia districts that have not typically voted for conservatives. So that's still going to be really hard, and it depends who runs. But I always think of these things as if they've always been universally opposed to everything we believe in, there's nothing but opportunity to get better. That's kind of how I view it.
Where's John Edwards?
So he's a Roanoke, and he's actually in a district. His new district is actually also with Senator Suderline, who's an incumbent Republican. So Senator Suderline will run, and we do hope that district would likely be captured by Senator Suderline, who has a very strong score on our report card.
All right. We don't often list names, but this was so important because they did block everything.
Yes.
So what is the best way that people can redemptively use this information we are giving them?
I just think you need to know your own district. How does your own senator vote? Are you in one of these places? And you've got to talk to your friends and neighbors. And even if these people are not your representatives, the larger picture of the fact that we really do largely have one party blocking parents' rights, I really believe that should cross party lines. Both parties should be standing with parents. And I think that's a message anybody can share with someone.
And also, I think one thing you've said that I think is so encouraging to people is that even when things get blocked at the state capital level, you can have traction at the local level. And we are seeing this with issues like in Southwest Virginia with these pro-life zoning ordinances. Even though all the pro-life bills got blocked at the state capitol, these citizens are having movement on this issue in their local cities and on the school boards. Our Protect Every Kid movement, our Speak Up Virginia movement are having great success with either getting school boards to reject bad policies that cut parents out, or to adopt strong parental rights policies at the local level. So that's a way you can continue to engage even when you see things getting blocked at the state level, because that keeps the movement going.
Yeah, we would be remiss if we acted like this was the only way issues advance. They advance at the local level. They advance in sometimes legal situations. Our Founding Freedoms Law Center can move an issue forward by challenging it in court. And sometimes they advance simply by winning more hearts and minds so that people come alongside our issues. That changes the politics over time. So people need to realize this is, a tough report. It's not all good news, but that's not the only aspect of these issues.
There are redemptive things happening.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, once again, we're running tight on time. So I just want to let people know next time we're going to cover one remaining facet of all that, and that is what happened in with the budget issues. Because even though the General Assembly has officially ended, they did deadlock on the budget. So they are still having to deal with that. And that does impact some things we care a lot about on abortion funding through the state budget, whether opportunity scholarships for impoverished kids are going to get cut or whether we can save that, and tax cuts for families and businesses. So we'll update you on the final outcome of that the next time around. In the meantime, if you would like a nice, easy-to-use chart of everything that we just talked about, the wins and the losses on all these important life, family, freedom issues in the General Assembly, you can find that you can find it in a nice downloadable chart that you can share with friends, and you can look right there, the wins and losses, how they happened. Just go to familyfoundation.org, that's familyfoundation.org, and look for the big banner that talks about a General Assembly report. Again, familyfoundation.org will have a good chart for you to just kind of summarize everything we talked about today. Well, it's that time again. Time for our Inconceivable Moments Award. This is where we're featuring examples of the absolute lunacy and craziness that happens when cultural leaders try to give guidance completely apart from biblical principles. And we're calling this the Liberals' Most Inconceivable Moments Award.
Inconceivable!
You know, the FBI has come under a ton of criticism lately, for little things like labeling moms as potential terrorists or targeting pro-lifers while actual violent attacks are happening against pregnancy resource centers, things like that. But even still, apparently the FBI is not getting the message that maybe now might be a time to kind of back up and reassess what's going on here. Nope, that's not happening. Now we have news that from right here in Richmond, the local FBI office has moved from targeting moms and pro-lifers to targeting religious people like Catholics.
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff, honestly, that it's like actually hard to believe. You think you're reading some kind of like spoof website or something, but no, really, sadly, it turns out to be true that the FBI's Richmond, right where we are, field office actually did indeed issue a memo, and the quote was, "Violent extremists in radical traditionalist Catholic ideology." That's what it was about. Yeah. That's the target of the memo.
Let's just hear that again. Violent extremists in radical traditionalist Catholic ideology. I mean, I guess those rosaries can be really dangerous weapons. Got to watch out for those secret Catholic cells that might become terrorists. But seriously, what do you think's going on here?
I mean, first of all, it's just really disturbing that this memo can even be put out, let alone the fact that it was issued, I noticed, right around the time that we were having the March for Life, which is a highly Catholic event. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the fact that there's this list of qualities that supposedly make certain Catholics more attractive to the violent extremists, like a preference for the traditional Latin Mass, and so-called anti-LGBTQ, beliefs, or that if you're on the side of traditional marriage,
biblical sexuality.
I would call it biblical sexuality. If you're actually one of those Catholics that believes the Catholic doctrine, is kind of how I would read that. Or if you have anti-abortion views, basically you're a traditional Catholic.
Yeah, I noticed they threw in, quote, white supremacist ideology for good measure, but it just kind of seemed like they were using the usual kind of racial LGBTQ cards to really marginalize conservative Catholics because conservative Catholics are the ones that are more in favor of the traditional Latin Mass and, and the pro-life views and that kind of thing. Well, also, I'll just throw out this memo made specific reference to this phrase. They had an acronym for it, RTC.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a thing. But I guess we're all learning.
A radical traditionalist Catholic.
I don't know if traditionalist Catholics have ever
radical.
Yeah, if they consider themselves radical. In fact, most of the world would look at people that go to traditional Latin Mass, and radical would not be the word that would come to their mind.
I don't know. I think the 12 disciples were considered pretty radical in their time, don't you think?
There are worse things to be called, but when you're called it by the FBI, who has the ability to dramatically enforce things against radicals, that's where it gets scary.
Yeah. I just got to say it did kind of make me wonder because, well, let me back up and say in this memo, they apparently revealed plans that they thought it was a good idea to have Catholics infiltrate and spy on one another because this is such a threat. And I did kind of have to think about the radical Jesus movement in the 70s. that could be called radical. With the FBI, if we had today's culture, would the FBI be infiltrating the Jesus movement, kind of invading that?
I can't even imagine. But yeah, I think they would have been, because they're threatened by our ideology, those of us that believe in Jesus.
But the bigger issue is this pattern of our own government creating these watch lists, for moms, for pro-lifers, and now Catholics. I mean, it's a trend, and we need to pay attention to it, because one day it could be us on that list.
I have friends that would check every one of those boxes.
Yeah.
Like, literally, they're a mom, they're Catholic, they're pro-life, and they're probably the most non-threatening people I know. I can't figure out how this is where we've gotten to.
Well, the good news is, at least the national FBI headquarters has basically disavowed this memo put out by our Richmond office, saying it, quote, does not meet the exacting standards of the FBI. So apparently they have exacting standards.
I'd really love to know what those are that got the pro-lifers and the and the moms on the list. Like, those are the exacting standards, apparently. Sorry, you were.
Well, at least we're drawing the line somewhere.
Right.
Well, I guess that means this week's Inconceivable Award does need to go to our local Richmond FBI office, or at least the person in the office who wrote this memo, for demonstrating to us all the extreme irony of labeling other people as extreme, while you yourself are so out there that your own national headquarters has to disavow you. Thanks for joining us for this week's Speak Up Virginia, brought to you by the Family Foundation. Visit us at familyfoundation.org. That's familyfoundation.org. See you next time, and don't forget, we are stronger when we speak together.